Okay, welcome again to another ZK Ask the Expert session. Today with the ZK 9.5 features, the big one, accessibility, a few smaller topics, a few popular topics that were asked for a lot. Try to introduce them today. It's not a complete training about these features today, so I can only mention a few, and if there's big interest, we can have a dedicated session about one or the other topic at a later point. I will mention when this is a potential possibility, when I think this topic is bigger to talk about. They'll let us know after the meeting. So I'm Robert, as always, or as last time, and support engineer at ZK since 7 years, roughly. Yeah, and I've seen many versions of ZK in the meantime. So today, talk about ZK 9.5. One of my colleagues already prepared the new feature small talk. You see, it's a long list. I will go over a few of them briefly. A few others I prepared a small demo about, just to see this in action. And the accessibility, I think, is the biggest one. I'll dedicate most of the time at the end about it, because you can put any arbitrary amount of time at it. Okay, let's just get started. So accessibility is one of the I said I'll skip it for now, but we get to it later because that's the big topic. So what we have is sometimes we were asked for simplifying syntax, making a few APIs more more convenient to use. So we added a bit of syntax sugar into the MVVM data binding. That's not interesting to everyone because not everyone's using MVVM. So just go quickly over it. So what we have is a quicker way to register a view model. Instead of saying ID and init, you can just say add without anything. And because of the view model property name already, it knows what to do. And it will just assign a default name VM and load this class as the view model. I think doesn't need any extra explanation, just like this. Similar, the init binding has a small shortcut. Just use add. We deliberately chose init because that's a binding that's often forgotten, because load bindings. Oh, do I share my screen?
Yes.
Okay, you share my screen. Okay, somehow Gene came to me asking, someone says no. So something is not working right. Okay, thanks for pointing out. So someone says I'm sharing the screen. I will stop sharing and reshare. Wait a second. Why does someone say yes when I'm really not sharing the screen? I'm really sorry. Desktop number 2. Okay. Now it should be up again. Somehow weird that someone said yes and someone says no. Okay. All right. It's working now. Good. Then I will just start again. So I skipped over this part. We'll get to it. We have a dedicated demo to this. And syntax binding, we just see the shortcut for the view model initialization. This is the shortcut for the default name VM and init with the class name. You can also use this to initialize this with a Spring Bean, if you have a Spring Bean in this case. Instead of using a string, you just use the dollar curly braces syntax for your Spring Bean name. So nothing really changed, just a shortcut. As said, syntax sugar shouldn't change anything, just makes you write less. Same here, the default init binding, we chose init because that's often forgotten. Because in most cases you have static labels or things that don't change, and then the init annotation is cheaper than a load binding that's actually listening for changes. So you still have to use load to explicitly opt into the more expensive load binding if you need dynamic changes, if you need to notify change values. But very often you can get by with init or the dollar curly braces EL syntax for static expressions that don't even occupy the data at all. They're just inline replaced when the Zool is not parsed, but when the Zool is executed. It happens before the bind lifecycle. So also, I think it doesn't need a lot of explanation extra, unless I'm missing something. Implicit command binding, same as here. If you have a listener, it starts with the on character sequence, and you just add a string. It will call this listener, this command binding directly. You don't have to spell out the command binding, because it's in most cases clear that you want to have a command binding on click listener. I think nothing else works anyway. And you can just skip the command binding completely. If it's a public method, you can call it as a command. Then there's a new feature that's also quite handy, because previously you always type lots of binding params for all the named parameters. It's just a long list, and very often you just have 1 or 2 parameters, and then the order doesn't really matter too much. So you can, instead of binding parameters and name, you can just put them in a sequence, choose your command, and then add the parameters in sequence, and it just calls the method or calls the corresponding command method. I prepared a small example for this. So for the syntax sugar, I created a small page. Here you see just all the features again. We have the view model binding, just using the class name. We have the init binding for static binding. We have the commands. We have the commands with parameters by order, and the corresponding view model function just looks like this: string name int number. In most cases, I think this is convenient enough if you just transport one object, like in each variable, for example, somewhere from a list box. Here you click something, you want to delete the current row, you just delete each object, and from the each object you can find out what to do in the view model. This just removes a bit of repeating of strings and names if you don't need it, but still you can use the previous syntax. But I think I need to somehow remove this window. It's blocking my mouse. Wait, I tried a risk it. Last time I clicked close and it stopped it, so I clicked the start button this time.